This is such an important role for our clinicians, and no one else is bothered because they can all just come to me.
Hello, welcome to The Seasoned RD, a podcast connecting newer professionals in the field of eating disorders
to those of us who have been around for a while. I'm your host, Beth Harrell, a certified eating disorders registered dietitian and supervisor.
And I'm Abby Brown, a registered dietitian who is newer to the field.
I think of myself as a well-seasoned cast iron skillet with wisdom and experience, yet always ready for something new.
And I think of myself as an Instapot with innovation and a fresh perspective. This podcast brings both to the table to share ingredients, recipes, and techniques of past and present so we can all be our best for the future.
The kettle is heating up. The skillet is on simmer. So join us around the table for true professional nourishment. Abby, ready to stir the pot?
Let's do it.
Hello and welcome to this episode of The Seasoned RD with Millie Plotkin. Millie might just be our most unique guest. She is not a clinician in the field of eating disorders, but we call her Millie the Magician. And when I say we, it's the faculty of the core courses for certification and any of us in the field who have access to her, which now you all do. She is a know-it-all who you aren't offended by. It's a know-it-all who you want to be your friend. She gives lots of tips to us today on how to find research. She's the creator of the Information Gateway for eating disorder research. And if you've been following this podcast from the beginning, you might have heard me talk about some of the shifts and how we refer to the severity of eating disorders in terms of mortality rate. And she also shares some genetic information. And keeping in mind that even since we did this recording with Millie, we have more updated information on some of the genetics and percentages. So keep in touch with this podcast because things just keep evolving, and this is a place for you to stay on top of all of it. During this talk, we refer to the Academy for Eating Disorders ICED talk on weight neutrality and weight inclusivity in medical care. And you can still join the symposium. It's open through December. It's just the live portion is not available anymore, but all the recordings are available to you. And we'll put that information in the show notes for you.
So excited to have you on. You are first in this unique position you have as an informationist. So we're really excited to get your perspective here.
It's very nice to talk to both of you.
Yeah. Well, we have a couple of questions for you just to kind of, learn a little bit more about you. We know you're a cat lover, but these are some other questions, and then we're going to get into your profession.
Okay.
So my first question for you, do you prefer mountains or beach?
Definitely mountains.
Abby, you are outnumbered.
I am outnumbered. I was shocked.
Especially the ones in Scotland.
Really?
I'm a big Scotland fan, and I love hiking there, and the mountains there are gorgeous.
Okay. I have never been, so maybe that's what will change me to be more of a mountain girl if I go to Scotland.
Okay, Millie, next time you go, make sure that I'm on your list. I'd love to hike with you in Scotland.
September next year is the plan.
Okay, 2022.
Yes.
Okay.
So then our second question for you is, do you prefer breakfast or dinner?
That's a hard question. I like breakfast because I don't have to think about it a lot. You get up, just want to get on with the day. But dinner can be more interesting because I like cooking.
So you're leaning towards dinner, you think?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Although if I don't want to think about it, I can have leftovers, and occasionally I'll have a bowl of cereal for dinner.
Right. Or leftovers for breakfast.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Now, I think this one we thought was going to be great for you in your position. Audiobook or paper?
Paper.
That was quick.
The thing with audiobooks is you have to really concentrate or you'll miss something. And with paper, if your mind starts to wander, you just find your place on the page again.
Exactly.
That's a good point.
That is a good point. I am so electronic these days. And I had a client yesterday, the first one ever, who said she doesn't like podcasts. And because she's a visual learner. All right. Well, let's find out a little bit tell us about your profession, because you're, again, like Abby said, such a unique guest on this. Our audience is doctors, dietitians, therapists, physical therapists, anyone who's considering doing some care in the field of eating disorders. And so you're definitely the unique.
So as Abby said earlier, my title is Informationist, and that is a fancy term for medical librarian. It's used specifically in the medical librarianship field for someone who has a subject specialty. And of course, my subject specialty is eating disorders. So yeah, I do have a very unique role. I only know of one other treatment center who has a librarian, and that person just works a couple of days a week, more as, to keep her hand in after retirement than as a full-time profession like I do.
And it's ERC specifically, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes. So I was hired by ERC 8 years ago to do this. And I always laugh because during my job interview, the CEO said to me, within 5 years, every treatment center is going to have an informationist because they'll realize this is such an important role for our clinicians. And no one else is bothered because they can all just come to me.
Well, and that's to the benefit. I mean, really kudos to Eating Recovery Center for having you available for the rest of us. That's important. And people can find you in lots of places other than ERC, right?
Yes, I am on the board of the Academy for Eating Disorders. I'm the director of social and online media for that organization, and I'm on the staff of iaedp as their curriculum coordinator for the certification program. Oh, and I'm also on the board of the Eating Disorders Coalition.
Okay. And do you have something to do with NEDA, the NEDA website as well?
Not officially, but NEDA, the Alliance, other organizations, when they are updating the information on their websites, informational handouts, they'll often come to me to say, hey, what's the latest data on this? They do reach out to me quite often.
Awesome. You just have your hand in many different buckets. You wear multiple hats. That's so fun, though.
Yes.
How'd you get into the eating disorder niche?
Well, I'm recovered myself from an eating disorder. And it just happened that I started treatment with an outpatient therapist while I was in library school. So those two parts of my life really came together at the same time. And I had not planned on being a medical librarian. My concentration was in archives, but it just happened the first full-time job that I got while I was doing my training was at the National Library of Medicine, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. So I sort of fell into the medical side of stuff that way. But as I said, I started treatment right after I joined NIH. So it sort of became important to me to meld those in a professional way.
Very, very unique. What does it take to become a librarian or informationist? What's the path educationally?
The official definition, at least in the United States, of a librarian is someone who has a master's degree in library science. In some places, it's called library and information science. And those programs usually need to be accredited by the American Library Association. So, of course, there are a lot of people who work in libraries who don't have their degree or in the process of working on it. And we call them paraprofessionals. And they're very valuable to the field. I don't want to degrade anyone who does not have their master's because they can have just as much experience or possibly even more than someone who has the degree. But as I said, the official definition of a librarian is someone who does have a master's degree in library science.
So it's a full-on master's degree. Do you have to take a board exam or anything?
No. Different programs, of course, work in different ways. The one that I was in, we had comprehensive exams, but there's no sort of state licensing the way there is in your field.
So I'm a little bit curious about what exactly does a typical day, I'm sure it varies, but a typical day working at ERC, do they send you, hey, Millie, we want to know about such and such, and you do the research, or what exactly does that look like?
That's a big part of it. So I always tell people I have two jobs within my job. One is answering those sort of questions. So I'll get questions from clinicians, from our marketing people, as I said, from the nonprofit organizations saying, hey, can you do a literature search on this topic? What is the most recent information? What are important statistics? That sort of thing. Also, I do have access to a lot of articles that are behind paywalls. So I'll also just get, hey, I'm really interested in reading this specific article. Can you please send it to me?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other part of my job is the Eating Disorders Information Gateway, which is a huge citation database of all the published articles in the field, plus books, plus the nonprofit handouts. There's a bunch of other stuff in there, but the majority of it is journal articles. So when I don't have literature requests to respond to, then I spend my time cataloging everything. Like this morning, I started working on the most recent issue of the International Journal of Eating Disorders.
Handpicked by you for that gateway.
Yes. So there are certain the journals that are focused on eating disorders. I just do every single article, like iaedp. And then there are, of course, hundreds, actually even thousands of other journals out there, which will occasionally have articles in our field. So I'll use PubMed, Google Scholar to find those and then add them to the catalog. I have what we call a taxonomy, which is a list of keywords, subject headings that I add to everything to try to make it easier for people to search.
So does the majority of your research, does it fall in a specific category? So for example, maybe it's about different types of treatments they've tried out on patients with eating disorders, or is it just a wide variety?
It's really a wide variety. Certainly, a lot of clinicians are interested in learning about, what are these treatments? Do they work? Mm-hmm. What can I use for this patient who has maybe a unique comorbid condition? But then, it can really be all over the place.
We were on a call as we're preparing, and we want to make sure people know, because this episode should come out before we do our presentation at the Academy for Eating Disorder, the ICED conference. So we want to make sure that people connect with us. But we were on a call last week with Dr. Peebles. And then afterwards, you and I said, Millie, do you happen to know of any case studies of people who have had bariatric surgery that their oncologist thinks actually caused pancreatic cancer? So you whipped up some journals or some, we really didn't find anything.
Right.
So those are the kinds of questions that you might get asked too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. ERC, all treatment centers, often will have people who had bariatric surgery and still have an eating disorder.
Shock.
Yes, the surgery is not a cure. And may have some sort of unique medical condition like that, or some sort of comorbid psychiatric condition. People will say, as you did, I have a patient who has this. Can you see if there are any other case studies or journal articles about this that I can work with the patient on? It might be the patient asking for the information. It might be their physician who's trying to learn more about it.
Great. So tell people, because you just use an acronym, iaedp.
Oh, yes. International Journal of Eating Disorders.
Okay. Thank you. I knew what that was, but this podcast really is for newer professionals entering the field, as well as those of us who would know what we don't know and we want to keep learning. So the International Journal of Eating Disorders. And I imagine, part of the whole idea of bringing bringing you and other guests here is, how do we stay current? And, there's ways that you talked about, you have all kinds of access. You have all kinds of access. I think that if we could also tap into your personal experience of recovery and your personal experience with professionals who treat eating disorders and those who are just in the general population, kind of, when you first started in this field, what was in the literature and now what's in the literature that you want us to know?
Well, there's definitely a lot more now. I think there are more journals. For instance, this is different from iaedp. There's one called just the Journal of Eating Disorders, which is completely open access. That one started, I don't remember exactly what year, but definitely after I started as an informationist working on this. And that's been a fantastic resource. It's very highly regarded. There was one called Advances in Eating Disorders, which unfortunately only lasted a couple years. And then there's one called Appetite. There's the European Eating Disorders Review. There's the one called Eating and Weight Disorders. So in the 90s, I think the only journal in the field was iaedp. And now there's a whole bunch of them. And I think there's a large interest by researchers in these topics, which really helps. I want to go back to something that you said about just keeping up to date. One thing that I do is, even if I don't have a subscription to a journal, almost all publishers have a way that you can sign up to get notices whenever new articles come out or a new issue comes out. It's on the publisher's website. So that's one of the things that I do, is I get notices from all of these major eating disorder journals so that I don't have to go to them and see, do they have new articles this week? I just get it coming to my inbox.
Can you specify what you want from them? Like if you're really looking into atypical anorexia as a tagline.
I'll be honest, I'm actually not sure because I'm looking for everything. So
everything. Okay. I'll let you know.
Yeah. I just say, I want a notice about everything from your journal. Okay. I really don't know about the answer to that question.
Okay. Great information about the publisher.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And then PubMed is great because you can search on there by most recent. So that's something I'll do quite often, is just go in, put eating disorders as a search, and then ask it to sort by publication date. And then I can see everything that has come out since the last time I did my search. Google Scholar is a little bit more difficult to organize. You can do it by year, but it doesn't really do it by publication date.
Okay.
But it's still a great place to look for open access to articles.
Yeah.
That's something I really suggest, is that if people are trying to get a specific article, go to Google Scholar, type in the article name, and it has everything set up in two columns. The left is the links to the publisher usually, and the right side, it will show you if there is a free PDF. So that's really easy to use. Another tip, of course, I don't mind people contacting me to ask for articles, but another thing is contact the author and say, hey, your article is behind a paywall. I would really be interested in reading it. And the vast majority of time, they're so excited that someone wants their article, they're really happy to send it to
you. Wow. Maybe they're excited that you are asking for it. But I think if they got bombarded by all of us little people out here, that maybe they wouldn't be. But no, I understand.
No, they want to know that someone is reading their article. They put all that work into it. And then they don't really know, are people using it unless they get they can sign up for usually something for other researchers to say, oh, your article was cited by this other researcher in this article, but they don't really know if just everyone else is reading it.
Mm-hmm. And this we can cut out if it's not appropriate. But my question, because if you're publishing a book and you give people free copies, then you miss out on any royalties or whatever. If it's a journal article, and they they bypass the paywall.
Journal articles do not have royalties. It'd be really nice if they did, but all of the money goes to publishers.
Okay.
But when I send it to you, if the article author sends it to you, that is not a copyright violation. It falls under fair use, under copyright law. I can't post something on the web if it's behind a paywall, but I can send it to you individually, which is why the Eating Disorders Information Gateway is a citation library rather than a library of every article. That would be illegal.
Yeah. So how do we find the gateway?
Go to actually, I'm going to look at this to make sure that I tell you correctly.
Millie, I wish I could just like take a second and live inside of your head. I just feel like you're filled with information.
I think I would be overwhelmed, Abby. That's why.
Yeah.
I mean, even we were talking a little earlier just about how much information is out there, how exhausting it is to be across from your client when we, are experiencing our own emotional reaction to some of the things that are happening in their world and in our own world. And then to, know that there's so much information coming out there. And this is what I think Millie is so excellent at and why she's highly sought after is that if you're creating a course, like she mentioned, the core courses for certification for iaedp, if you're going to be a CEDS, Certified Eating Disorder Specialist, or Certified Eating Disorders Registered Dietitian, that you take the 4 courses, which is overview, and then therapeutic modalities, nutrition treatment, and medical treatment. So each year, Millie has her hand in saying, hey, let's take a look at this and let's add that in there. And when we used to be live, people in the audience would ask and say, hey, I thought there was something new coming out. And Millie was in the front row saying, yes, I have it.
Yes.
So
I always have my computer with me so that if someone asks that sort of question, I can say, okay, just a moment, I'm going to look and see if you were corrected,
Yeah,
that article came out last month. We didn't have time to put it into the core courses.
Yeah.
So you asked about how to get to the gateway.
Yeah.
If you go to eatingrecoverycenter.com, you will see a list of tabs in the upper right. Click on professionals, and then you can scroll down to information gateway.
Beautiful. Wow.
And then that brings you to a page that talks about it, and it has a link. One important thing to realize is if you don't get an account, you will have access to some consumer level stuff. I did this because family members, someone who is just diagnosed, are going to be completely overwhelmed if they're trying to do a search for really basic information and they're finding, literally 10,000 articles on their topic. I don't want to do that to people. But if you are a professional in the field, you want more in-depth, when you go to the gateway in the upper right, you will see a button that says request an account. When you do that, I try to get to them really quickly. I will send you your username and password, and that gives you access to the full 25,000 resources
Wow.
that are in there, which again, I realize can be really overwhelming. All of you, you're working full-time with your clients and then doing case notes, possibly fighting with insurance companies. And I know that you might not have time to do a lot of research, which is why people then come to me and say, hey, can you do this for me?
And your email address is right there for everybody.
Yes.
Just like how you mentioned earlier that, people thought there would be more of you at this point in time. It just seems like there has to be, with so many people wanting to know about research. And I mean, I can imagine that you have to get a little bit bombarded sometimes with, hey, Millie, what do you think of this?
Well, one thing that I am hoping is going to happen in the not too distant future is Eating Recovery Center has expanded, and we now have a partner program called Pathlight Behavioral Health, which focuses on mood and anxiety disorders. So I'm hoping that we will be able to create a parallel information gateway on those topics. And for that to happen, we're going to need another informationist who is a specialist. And then I can just focus on eating disorders.
Yeah.
So I wish I could tell you when that's going to happen, but it is something that I've been talking to my supervisors about and the higher ups at ERC, and they know that this is an important goal. So hopefully we will have another informationist to help me out.
You'll always be the informationist in my heart, for sure. And you also became an associate through the iaedp Institute.
Yes.
So tell us about what that is.
Okay, so that is a program through iaedp for people who don't want to or not able to get full certification. There's sort of two categories of people that fall into that. People like me who don't treat patients at all, but are really interested in the topic. And also people who are clinicians, but only see an occasional eating disorder patient. Maybe where they live, like a rural population, there's not many, they don't have anyone that they can refer to treat those patients. So they want to get an expertise, but they just don't see many of them. Or maybe they're part of a larger practice that just gets all sorts of different patients coming in. So they'll maybe see a few eating disorder patients, but it's not a specialty. They don't have enough to do 2,500 hours of supervision, which is what's required for certification. So for the associate, you have to take the 4 core courses, which Beth mentioned earlier, and then take an exam, which shows that you hopefully really learned from these courses. And actually now I should say that in addition to the core courses, both certification and the associate have a series of what we are calling modules, which are specialized topical videos. They're all different lengths. Some of them are an hour, some of them are much shorter, but topics like treating patients who are suicidal, treating Black women. I'm trying to remember what some of the other
There's
ones are.
a nursing one.
Yeah, there's a nursing one.
Physical therapy and occupational therapy.
Yeah, so I think there are 8 right now. So those are required, and that you do get tested on those under both certification and the associate. So we've done that to expand the range of knowledge, since trying to pack everything into 4 3-hours courses was getting really difficult. There's so much important information out there. So now there's a lot more to listen to, but those modules are included in the cost. You don't have to pay extra for them. Mm-hmm. You can get CDs for those, of course, and they're, packaged together.
Yeah.
But I definitely recommend the associate for people who either might be working for a treatment center in marketing. I think that's a great place so that marketing people can really say, hey, I know about this. Because a lot of people come into marketing for treatment centers with no knowledge in the field, and they're just trying to learn really quickly. People in leadership positions who aren't treating patients anymore, again, to have that specialized knowledge. Maybe someone who's a receptionist for a private practice and needs to be able to answer questions and not just always say, well, I'm going to get back to you when I talk to the clinician about that. Obviously, there's things that they will have to ask the clinicians, but it really gives them a good grounding in all this knowledge.
Yes. I love when I was in that area, I had a personal chef reach out to me to say, what is the associate? I need to know the language. She was working with a family whose daughter struggled with anorexia, and she knew she wasn't treating it, but she was making food for this family, and she wanted to kind of learn that language. So that was pretty intense. And like we mentioned earlier, Abby is just got a certification as a personal trainer. And so we need good weight inclusive, health at every size informed personal trainers and eating disorder informed. And so you're not going to be treating as that certificate alone eating disorders, but you will have that language, complete the core courses.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because health at every size, weight inclusivity is an important part of those core courses.
Yeah.
That's something that iaedp has really gotten behind.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. And there's a neurobiology module too. I don't want to forget about that because that one's actually, absolutely. There's an hour long, but then there's a whole 3-hour piece of it. So that's the best part, is that the iaedp is staying abreast on what's new, and they can put in those modules. They've got the base core pieces and then can bring in those other kind of emerging. And Millie, when you said, the health at every size, weight inclusivity, that's one of those things that back when you first started in this field, and when I first started in this field,
it wasn't new. There were definitely people who had been looking at this since the 70s and 80s, but it was still considered very radical. And it's great to see that in the last few years, it's really become much more mainstream, and people are realizing the harm that they are doing to patients by recommending bariatric surgery for someone who has binge eating disorder, by telling patients who are gaining weight as part of their treatment for anorexia, oh, don't worry, I'm not going to let you get fat. Which is still something that I know that people are saying a lot, but hopefully as we're teaching them through these courses and certification, that I really hope that's going to stop.
Mm-hmm. It was radical. And there's so many things that I'm grateful for, like FBT, family-based treatment, where back about 30 years ago when I started in the field, we were trying to keep people separate, not people, but adolescents, teens, older or younger adults, giving them their separation, their, I don't know what to say. Like now we know through the 9 truths that through family-based treatment, but also highlighted in the 9 truths, is that families can be the best allies. We don't need to separate them. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes, sadly enough, we grieve the fact that families are not able to support someone in recovery in the way that we would like them to. However, we're not kind of separating them anymore.
Right. And not saying that everything is the parent's fault, which is
the blame
message,
the guilt. And there's is it 85% is considered genetic?
It varies by disorder. Cindy B. Look has shown that it's between 50 and 80%. So the ranges are different for each eating disorder, and of course also individually.
Mm-hmm.
So some people will have a very strong genetic basis. They've got a fantastic supportive family. And then there are other people who, as you said, don't have a great family life. There's still some genetics there, but maybe it's more of a balance between the two.
Okay. While we're on this topic of new things or things that have changed, Millie is the one who taught us all, or maybe definitely taught me, when there's shifts in, for example, that statistic, 85%, that's what I had heard. So 50 to 80 is maybe more, but there's context to that, along with the statement that is now outdated. Eating disorders are the number 1 highest mortality of any mental health disorder. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes. So several years ago, I believe it was 2014, an article came out talking about mortality rates for all sorts of different mental health conditions. And that one showed that actually substance abuse, specifically opioid use, is higher than anorexia or nervosa. So one thing people ask me is, when did that shift occur? We don't know. There are no annual statistics on eating disorders mortality. I wish there were, but there are not. So it's really hard to know. The other thing is, and this is just my personal theory, I don't know if I'm completely right about this, but for a very long time, substance abuse was not considered part of standard mental health. It was parallel to it. They kind of were cousins, but now we have more of an understanding that they're really siblings. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it was something of that bias in the field, that when people were talking about mortality rates and mental illness, that they just weren't even looking at substance abuse. and comparing it. And I think that's a big change, but I don't know for sure if that is why that change in statistics came about. But I can tell you, once I read that and started talking to people and saying, hey, this seems to really be a change that we need to make in our messaging, I got together with the heads of several organizations like NEDA, Project HEAL, the Alliance for Eating Disorders Awareness. At the time, BETA was still around, and literally got together in a meeting room with them and said, look, I think we need to fix this. We're putting out misinformation. We need to tell people, no, opioid use is more deadly. And of course, we know that there's a huge overlap between eating disorders and substance use.
I was going to ask you that, if there was some sort of correlation between the two.
Yeah. I mean, we know that there's a lot of people who have both. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the numbers of people with substance abuse who also have an eating disorder is very high. I don't know specifically about opioid use. I would have to look that up. I know that there's articles that do talk about that comorbidity. I just can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. But yeah, there's certainly people who pass away, and it could be due to an overdose, or it could be to someone who is using substances or I should say abusing substances, and also has an eating disorder and dies from the medical complications. And of course, when suicide gets into this, and we know that eating disorders have a very high suicide rate, and someone also has substance abuse, then, which category do you put that under? I don't know.
Yeah. And you mentioned something earlier, Millie, that I had a question about. Well, when we were talking, Beth, you gave the example of how a chef reached out to you for the associate program. And then Millie, you said before that even that physicians will reach out to you and ask more about research related things. And I think that's so great that physicians want to know the proper research in the world of eating disorders, because I think there is still a lot of misunderstanding there. How frequently does that happen, that physicians are reaching out to you for something specific in eating disorders?
I will say the vast majority of them are people who are already working in the field.
Okay.
But the professional liaisons that we have at Eating Recovery Center who are part of marketing, a lot of what they do is they will go into physicians' offices and talk to them and say, hey, do you know anything about eating disorders? Let me give you some information. So sometimes our people reach out to me and say, hey, I'm meeting with a gynecologist. I would love to bring them information about infertility and pregnancy issues so that they know what to look for and to screen people for an eating disorder. Can you please send me some articles? Or I'm meeting with an orthopedist and they probably see people who have bone density issues due to malnutrition over the years. What's some information that we can give? So that tends to be the contact that I have with physicians more than someone outside of the field contacting me.
That's great, though, to know that there's like a liaison there who can provide that information, because of course physicians are so busy, and I'm sure it's not always easy for them to be educated in every single area that occurs. So those connectors are great.
Yes.
Yeah. And when you mentioned physicians, Abby, it's so like when they become certified, they have to do the therapeutic modalities. They have to do the nutritional treatment of, and they have to do the diagnostic and the stigmas and the social justice piece of it, because yes, they're medical, but they also need to understand the person as a whole. And so, Millie, this might be a great segue into if people can find you at the AED, you're presenting, and you want to share with people the topic?
Yes. So Beth and I are actually presenting together with Dr. Rebecca Peebles about weight stigma and the need for weight neutrality when you're treating patients. So Beth is going to talk, of course, from the RD perspective, how she works with that, because a lot of the time RDs are expected to help with weighing patients and working with that fear that comes with stepping on a scale. Dr. Peoples is a physician. She works in an eating disorders treatment program, so she is very experienced and is very passionate on the topic of weight stigma and weight neutrality. And I'm going to be talking about my own lived experience because I am what we call small fat, which means that I'm labeled obese. Although, of course, I hate that term, but that's what it says on my medical chart. But I don't experience as much stigma as people who are in even larger bodies than me, but I do experience some, especially when I go to see the doctor and they put me on the scale, they calculate my BMI, they tell me you're too fat, you need to lose weight, even when they know that I had an eating disorder. I think that sharing that experience, and then I'm also going to be talking about how that translates into people avoiding medical care.
Yeah. So the medical piece, I didn't know this about Dr. Peebles, was that she had worked at some point in a bariatric program. And, so many of our guests and so many professionals in this field, we start out in an area that's very weight centric. That's how we have been trained up. And using the O words, and people in our field of eating disorders should not be using, and I'm saying should, right? Is that a shame word? But check yourself when you're using obesity, overweight. Those are stigmatizing words, and they may not even hold the same. Anyway, I won't get off on a tangent because we're going to spend a lot of time in our workshop on that. But when you ask the question, Abby, about medical doctors, it's really cool when you can find someone, and all of my clients are saying, do you have somebody who's weight neutral or weight inclusive? And I struggle in my own area. I've been in this field for a long time in the town that I'm in. It's, stories, right? The stories.
Yes. One of the experiences that I'm going to be sharing in our workshop is that I had a doctor just a couple years ago who had been recommended to me as an eating disorder specialist. And even though I'm fully recovered, it's kind of nice to be able to see someone who has some of that background knowledge. And so when I was searching for a new doctor, she was recommended. And I said, okay, great. She was so fat phobic. She was constantly bullying me about my weight. You need to lose weight. You should stop eating gluten so that you'll lose weight and never have diabetes. Yeah, I know. As a dietitian, I'm sure
it's laughable.
Insane. Yeah, it was really scary that this is someone who is claiming to be very knowledgeable about eating disorders and yet was promoting very disordered behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. It's really so powerful. And I mean, the Academy for Eating Disorder, ICED, is the International Conference on Eating Disorders.
Yes.
Or for eating disorders. And it's typically more of a research-based kind of academic type of conference. And we're going to shock everyone because we have someone with a lived experience, and I am not a researcher at all. I just have a lot of work over the years with clients, and Dr. Peoples is. And so it's going to be fabulous.
Yeah,
Come
really
see
looking
us.
Forward to it. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. This was really great, Millie. We do have one kind of wrap up question. If you, at the beginning stages of your career, could go back and do something differently or start something else, is there anything that you wish you would have done, maybe looking back?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I hadn't actually even thought about that. I would actually have to say no. I've been really happy with the way things have gone, the path that I've taken. And maybe I've made small mistakes along the way because I'm human. But I can't think of anything that I kind of shake my head and go, oh, wow, I really wish I hadn't done that.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's great that, of course, we make mistakes, but really end up being the best learning lessons sometimes.
Yes.
So I think that's great.
And now Millie's going to be one, because a lot of this podcast really is about supervision and kind of having that mirror from someone outside of us, helping us through this process as professionals. And as we bring in another informationist into the field of eating disorders, you get to be their supervisor.
Yes.
Like you have
they're not going to be eating disorders. They're going to be mood and anxiety.
Oh, that's mood and anxiety. That's right.
But I'm looking forward to teaching someone when I got started, I got my job at NIH that I mentioned during my very first semester of library school, because they wanted someone who was brand new and learning on the job.
Wow.
And so I would love to be able to give someone else that opportunity.
Well, I know that you would be a great teacher. I mean, we've learned
Thank
dozens
you.
of things from you just in this short time.
Thank you very much.
Let's lean on each other and learn from each other so we can grow together as professionals in this field of eating disorders. If you want to connect with me for supervision or membership with monthly content, please find me at bethharrell.com/professionals.